Please be seated.
តែវិធីសកម្មភាពនិងផ្ដល់វិធីការជូនទៅតំណាងសាបញ្ញាដើម្បីបន្តការតាំង
We are resuming our proceedings and will give the floor to the prosecution to continue examining the witness.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just one preliminary matter. We're moving a little slower because of the translation and other issues with this witness. I anticipate that this is obviously a very important witness. I have another session, one more session of questions relating to Tramkok, Krank Chan, maybe a little more. And then I'd like to pose questions to this witness also on the central zone. I'm assuming we will not be calling this witness back later in the trial. He has information relating to that. So in view of the having to go a little slower with this witness and his importance, we would, I've talked to the civil parties, we would request to have an additional session, which means that I would finish today and they would use the first session tomorrow morning. So that's our request in order to be able to cover the issues that this witness has.
Just to clarify, the request for an additional session is a combined request from the co-lead lawyers and the, thank you.
មួយពេលឬក៏មួយវគ្គសកម្មភាពនៅថ្ងៃនៅព្រឹកថ្ងៃស្អែក
Are you asking for a session today or you need the entire morning period tomorrow as well?
We're just asking for the first session tomorrow morning, so we would finish by the morning break, combined between us and the civil parties.
President, thank you very much.
Just to be clear, we're completely unprepared for any questioning on issues relating to the central zone. I wonder why this request is coming now and not earlier. I'm also asking myself the question in how far the upcoming questions on matters relating to the central zone is in fact within the scope of this second trial. So there's all kinds of questions that I have that are not answered at this stage. So I would like to have some more clarity and clarification from the prosecution as to what exactly, I mean, if it's questions on the rubber plantation, I suppose that's fine. But if it goes beyond that, then I would have a problem.
I can respond very, very easily to that. He shouldn't be baffled at all. I specifically brought up this issue when we were talking about the witness statements, the new witness statements that have been obtained. The purge of the central zone is a direct issue in this trial. This chamber has already said, particularly with elderly witnesses, that we're going to cover all of the relevant issues and not be in a position where we're having to call back witnesses. So no one should be surprised at all that this witness is going to be examined on this issue, which is one of the direct issues that are part of this trial.
I'm trying to keep up with all this, Mr. President, Your Honours, but I'm simply am not prepared for this, for these questions. I mean, there's all kinds of new statements that have arrived in our case file. There's so many issues. I don't see any reason why we should expect that this witness couldn't come back at one point in time. He seems quite fit. So I really don't see the necessity to move ahead to an issue that we have, at this point, very little or relatively little grasp on. So I find it very problematic that we move about, or we move on in this issue like it is a very normal request. It isn't.
I'm sorry, Mr. President, but the procedure in the first trial was that every witness would be examined on the entire scope of the trial. And with elderly witnesses in the first trial, the scope expanded beyond Case 00201 to include all Case 002 issues. So it has always been the order of this court that all witnesses are examined on the full scope of the trial. We have never wanted to put ourselves in the position of having to repeatedly call back witnesses. So I take great issue with this assertion.
President. The prosecution application has been objected to by the non-chair defense. The chamber needs to consider a number of relevant points. It therefore cannot rule on this matter now. It will render its decision after the break. Mr. Prosecutor, please proceed with your examination of the witness.
Mr. President, Mr. Witness, I provided you and your counsel with a couple of documents. I want you to, if you could, refer to E3-2107, E3/2107, and particularly at Khmer ERN 000-68051. That's 68051. English 00290-207. French 00655-727. And this is a note in relation to prisoner Tu Tip, which states, I quote, "After Ankar held a meeting on 24 January 1977 to announce that Chan Ranzi's group had all been smashed by the revolution and not a single man remained." End of quote. My question to you is, do you remember who Chan Ranzi was?
Mr. President, I only heard his name. I didn't know who he was. At the time, I was a child. I heard the name during the colonial period.
There is a reference in these notes to a meeting having been held on the 24th of January 1977. This was just a couple of weeks before you left for the Central Zone, where it was announced that this group had been smashed. Do you have any recollection of what this meeting was about?
I do not recall that. I did not attend that meeting.
In the same notebook, if you could now turn to Khmer page 000-68067, that's 68067, English 00290-235, and French 00655-749. There are notes there for a prisoner, Yin Born, who was a former Khmer Rouge soldier who had tried to flee because he was unhappy with the food and had not been allowed to marry his fiancée. And specifically, the notes say, quote, "He and a colleague both had fiancées in the village, and they had requested Ankar 3 or 4 times to marry, but Ankar would not permit it." End of quote. Can you explain why, during the Khmer Rouge regime, people had to get Ankar's approval for the person they would marry?
I was not aware of the story regarding those two persons. As regards marriages, there was a law governing marriages. The two persons had to be consenting for the marriage to be celebrated. It was impossible for any marriages to be celebrated without the authorization. They also needed the authorization of the parents. They also needed the authorization of the local chief. That was the law at the time. However, I wasn't aware of the story of those persons. I did not know the person in charge of the area where they lived. That was in 1971.
The translation I just received said 1971. Were you talking about 1971, or were you talking about during the Khmer Rouge regime?
As a matter of fact, it was as of 1970. That was the law governing marriages. It was as of that date. So you needed the authorization of the group leader. You needed their leave in order to organize marriages. Subsequently, there were too many marriages involving about 50 couples, and for those marriages to be conducted, we had to inform the superior, and that is why it was said at the time that group marriages had to be celebrated involving several couples at the same time. When the authorities refused to celebrate marriages, it was to leave the youths to decide freely. They had to engage in military activities, and if they insisted and they couldn't change their minds, then the marriages would go ahead. Thank you.
I'm a little confused by your answer. You talked about a law. Were you talking about a law during a law from the Khmer Republic government? Or are you talking about a law during the Khmer Rouge regime while the Khmer Rouge was in power?
As a matter of fact, the zone was under the revolutionary law, and the law was one of obedience. It had to do with coordination, facilitation, and at times people had to be stopped from getting married because they needed them for the army.
How was this revolutionary law or party principle, whatever you want to call it, how was this communicated to cadres, to party members such as yourself?
For example, in the Tramcock district, there was Korn as chief. In the southwest zone was Tamok. In the sectors, there were chiefs as well. We received instructions from the upper levels, and those instructions were that we should stop those we needed from getting married. So we had to convene a meeting inviting everyone in order to explain such instructions and to tell them that to liberate the country, we needed young men and women. And that is why they were asked to express their determination, to show proof of their determination, and some girls would raise their hands to do so, and even boys who were ashamed to do so would still raise their voices in order to be on the same level as the girls. So we couldn't afford to be too stern, so we had to negotiate with them and strike a compromise. So we used whatever means we had to convince them. So we'd organize stage performances for a day or two, and during those performances, when the youths would be singing, we would then try to convince them to follow the instructions. We could not afford to give more weight to violence. We had to be diplomatic.
So do I understand correctly that the practices or rules relating to marriage that were followed in Tramcock district had been communicated to you by the upper echelon? Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
And you mentioned that there came a time where there was too many couples getting married and that you needed to start group marriages. Do you remember what year it was that you started group marriages?
After the offensives, the attacks on the front, people could rest, and that was when marriages could be organized. The unit chiefs would inform the parents and the communal authorities. Organized marriages involving 4 or 5 couples, because at the battlefront there were no longer any problems. So they had to be married to avoid any conflicts.
And the decision to have group marriages, was that a decision made by the district itself, or was that also an instruction from the upper echelon?
ពីលើគាត់ណាយល់ព្រមឲ្យធ្វើយ៉ាង
The upper level officials gave their authorization, and it was up to us to organize those marriages, whether they were individual or collective. We consulted the communes and the district in order to celebrate such marriages. But we also had to consult the parents of those involved, and in particular the couples themselves.
All right, let me move on to another subject. The next area I want to ask you about concerns reports from Krang Tuchan that were sent to the district and then on to the sector. In your OCIJ interview E3/401 at Khmer 00373-475, English 00381-025, French 00426-213 through 214, you gave the following testimony. Question: can you explain to us what they did with the confessions sent from the Krang Tuchan Security Center, and where did they take them to? Answer: the confessions and reports, which were in the enclosed envelope and sent from the Krang Tuchan Security Center to the sector, had to go through the district first. The district then sent them on to the sector by the district messenger. 1 or 2 days later, the sector sent the decision writing on the confessions back to the district. And continuing further below in the same answer, quote, for the decision and confession that related to the people of District 105, which was sent in an open envelope, I would read them. If there were some names in the confessions were crossed by the red ink, it meant that the sector level had decided that these names were to be purged. To purge meant to kill. The district then sent these names to the Krang Tuchan Security Center, who was responsible for implementation. End of quote. What I would like to do now, Mr. Witness, and with your leave, Mr. President, is to provide you a few examples of confession reports from Krang Tuchan to ask some questions.
The President. You may proceed, Mr. Victor Copé.
Thank you, Mr. President. My request is if whether the prosecution would also be so kind to read the following sentence of that answer. Especially the sentence which starts, if the names in the confession were not crossed by red ink.
I'm reading from an outline. If counsel wishes to use this in his examination, he can. I don't think that's an appropriate objection.
Well, I'm always reprimanded for not citing the whole passage of the answer. So clearly, the following up part of this answer is very relevant. I think the witness is entitled to have that part of his answer read to him as well.
Counsel, I'm happy to do that. Can you tell me again which part you would like to read? Or can you just read it yourself?
Sure. If the names in the confession were not crossed by the red ink, it meant that the sector level had decided to release them back to their village. The district did not have the right to cross any name in the confession with the red ink. The district only had the right to receive the decision from and implement the decision of the sector level.
Mr. President, what I'd like to do now is to provide a few of these confession reports to the witness, and specifically starting with document E3-2012. That's E3/2012.
The President. Yes, you may proceed.
Mr. Witness, what you've been given are three reports, all from Krang Tachan, or from for the Educational Office of District 105, which each of them contains some handwritten annotations. The first page, which is the first page of E3-2012, is a 30 July 1977 report from ON, and it has an annotation up in the top left-hand corner that reads, "Smash them all," dated 7 August 1977, Tor 13, Proc. The second confession example report is also dated the 30th of July 1977. The annotation in the upper left-hand corner reads, "It is okay to smash," 7 August 1977, Tor 13, Proc. And the third report is dated the 11th of July 1977 from ON, and it has two annotations, one at the top left that says "to be smashed," and then next to two names that appear in the confession, two people that had been implicated, there is an annotation that reads "to be arrested." My first question is, do you recognize Krang Tachan Chairman ON's handwriting and signature in these documents?
Yes, I do. But as for the signature and the handwriting, I recognize that it belongs to Anne's. But these three letters I have issued, I actually left it. I left on the 7th of on July 1997, so I was not actually responsible because I was no longer there. I had already left.
I understand that. Can you tell us who Proc was and what Tor 13 was?
Pratt was in Sector 13 when Saum was sick. He had to be hospitalized, then Pratt came to take his place. Anne was there at the time.
And the instruction to smash, what did that mean?
To smash means two things. One is to eliminate. It doesn't mean that to execute, but to eliminate. In other words, to eliminate the sense of class exploitation of other people. So we have to get rid of all of this mindset. We have to get rid of all the these bad mindset. That is what it means in one sense. And the other one is to eliminate, to get rid of everything.
Mr. Witness, you were shown these documents during your OCIJ interviews, and let me remind you what you said in two different interviews about these documents. First in interview E3/401 at Khmer 00373-475, English 00381-025, French 00426-214, when you were asked about these documents and the meaning, you said, quote, "On this document, Prak, who was the secretary of Sector 13, made an annotation authorizing execution." And in your interview E3/4628, E3/4628 at Khmer 00373-391, English 00379-307, French 00426-199, you said, I quote, "This word smash was a reference to killing," end of quote. Mr. Witness, when a prisoner confession report was sent to the sector and it came back with an instruction to smash, that meant to kill the prisoner, correct?
That is correct. To eliminate, to smash, to kill, that is it. But in the in another meaning, it means that we get rid of the sense of class in the society. But I actually in this sense I did ask Prak, and it was meant at that time to be killed. When Prak was there, and Saum actually left as well when he was sick, he was admitted to hospital, but I had already left for Kampong Cham for 9 months already. Yeah.
All right. In the testimony of yours that I read a few minutes ago, where counsel was kind enough to add a little more of it, you testified that while you were Tram Kak District Chief, you received confession reports, which you sent to the sector, and that you received instructions back from the sector on who was to be killed, who was to be released, which you sent to Krang Tachan for implementation. I want to show you now, with your leave, Mr. President, a report, confession report from Prison Chief on from August 1976. It's document E3/4098, E3/4098, and it is on Khmer 00271-030 to 31, English 00322-114 through 15, and French 00623-837 through 838. Mr. President, with your leave, may I provide E3/4098 to the witness?
President. You may proceed.
Now, Mr. Witness, when you look at this document, there are two different documents copied on the pages. So if you would look at the left side, what I want to refer you to is the left side of the first page. That is on Khmer page 271030. And then on the next page, the right side of the document. This is a report from Krang Tachan, Chief An, dated the 4th of August, 1976, a period during which you were the district chief. It's regarding the confessions of two prisoners, Lei T, a former Lon Nol sergeant, and Ton Teen, a former drugstore assistant, who were accused of criticizing the revolution and planning to flee to Thailand. And what I'd want to refer you to is the annotation in the upper left-hand corner of the first page, an annotation that states, quote, "to be interrogated, then smash," end of quote. Do you recognize the handwriting of that annotation?
No, I do not recall. I do not recognize this handwriting, and neither do I recall this signature.
Now, you testified that sometimes what you got back from the sector office when you sent them confession reports were names marked in red. Did you also sometimes get back confession reports with handwritten instructions on them, like this document?
I do not see any cross sign. I do not see the red cross mark there, but I saw and this one was issued by and.
My question is, did Sector Chief Salm only respond by putting red crosses, or did the sector office sometimes write instructions in handwriting?
He merely put a cross sign beside it, and he did not make any additional comment, and he forwarded it to Com, and Com reviewed it, after which he would refer it to Anne, and I did not dare do anything without letting Com know.
You, in your testimony, trial testimony in 2013, this is at E1/215.1 at about 12:01 p.m., right around noon. You gave the following testimony, question. You said you requested for some release of the people from Krang Tachan security. Do you know what happened to those who were not released? Answer. I don't know what happened to them or where they should have gone, but I believe they died. Only some people were spared. End of quote. My first question, did you have the authority yourself to decide whether prisoners at Krang Tachan were released? Or was it only the sector or higher levels that could make that decision?
This issue of the prisoner, it was under the exclusive control of the sector. It was the matter within sector's responsibility. I only got the information from the base. They actually brought up the story of around 10 people. At that time, they requested to me that I was lenient on that, and I requested to others. And when I came back to the office, I made that request to the sector based on the request from the base. I had the authority at that time to request for people to be released from the security center. I did have that authority to request at that time, and when I made that request, he agreed. But then he said that I had to review it again, whether or not certain people would be involved in politics, and others who were not. I had to review it again before deciding to release those prisoners. But then later on he decided that those people be released.
And when you say that you were instructed to review whether people were involved in politics, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by people who were involved in politics?
Those who were arrested and imprisoned, whether or not they were related to serious political matters. If it was the case, then we would have to handle them differently. If they had done anything to do with that, then they would be arrested. So KOM or the militia in the commune would see, then they would arrest them. But when I went there, I actually found out different things. It was not really serious wrongdoing. Then I their request to the sector. I did not actually request to KOM. I requested to the sector because the prisoners were under the control of the sector. And at that time, they instructed me to review. Of course, at that time, I knew that some of them were released, but others were not. And I did not know because I could not find out the reason to request for their release. Because that was the affairs of the upper authorities, or other people had the intention to do it, and I did not dare to interfere too much. Otherwise, I would be in trouble myself.
That's what I wanted to ask you about. Did you worry if you asked too often for prisoners to be released, that you might be viewed as suspect? Did you worry about that?
I was concerned, but I had to be based on the reason. The things that was not related to politics, in other words, if they did not against the other people, and if I knew for sure that they were good people, gentle and obedient, and they were hardworking, so we had all the trust in him, then I would request to the upper authority, I would have them happily.
In OCIJ interview E3 4626, E3/4626 at Khmer 00373 through 66, English 00380 through 34, French 00426 you made the following statement, quote, "As for people who had problems at the base, for example, those who had committed immoral acts, were educated locally by the village and the commune. But if they still did not obey the rules after being educated, the commune would ask for an opinion from the district committee, which composed of Com, Kiev, Nev, and me, and the relevant commune committee. We would then hold a meeting to discuss the matter and make the decision. In the meeting at the district level, the party secretary was the one to make the final decision on the fate of the person being educated. But the district level had to consult with the sector party first before any specific decision was made. The sector party would then make a final decision. The district party was the one to implement the decision of the sector party. When, Mr. Witness, when the district asked the sector for an opinion or asked for guidance, and the sector responded, was that response considered an order or instruction that you were obliged to follow and implement?
That decision was the instruction, and it was also a guideline on the working procedure at the district level.
And did you know whether the sector had to consult with the zone, the level above it, before responding with decisions on executions or arrests?
In principle, they had to seek consultation. But did they seek consultation in every matter? That is beyond my knowledge.
I want to ask you about an incident you described in your interview E3 4626, E3/4626, and the reference is at Khmer 00373 469 through 470, English 00380 137, and French 00426 208. You were asked in the interview how Tamok was informed or reported to regarding Krang Tachan, and this is what you said, quote, "I thought he was briefed with either verbal report or written report about the Krang Tachan Security Center by the sector. I did not report to him, but I knew about that because in one day at the table of the sector level meeting, I overheard the sector report to Tamak about the matters of the security center. I overheard Tasaum tell Tamak that the group had been resolved. As I understood it, the phrase "had been resolved" meant that the group was already purged. End of quote. You were describing here a conversation you heard at a sector-level meeting. Where were sector-level meetings like this held?
That word was said following the meeting, and both of them talked to each other. Only the sector and the mock. It was between only two. They were speaking in a confidential manner. They only said that the matter had already been resolved. So at that time, the participant of the meeting had already left the meetings, and then both of them would talk to each other about that. But I, at that time, did not leave. I remained there. In the normal working procedure, when there was an approval, they would approve it orally, and they only spoke one or two words of approval, and that was it. It was not without any. It was without any documentation whatsoever. They only said the issue was resolved, and that was it.
How often did Tamak attend sector-level meetings?
After the assembly, when everyone had left, he came and subsequently he told us where we were gathered. One day I was at home at the Trapping office. He came looking very tired. He said that if someone was there, they should go and fetch him. So I would send someone to fetch him. There was a discussion, but I didn't attend that discussion. And after our meals, he explained the plans of action, and he convened a meeting of officials at the level of the commune, and he gave them those plans of action. So it was not possible for me to know what he had told them by way of instructions. That is what Tamak had told them.
And can you tell me where were these sector-level meetings held? Were they held somewhere in Tramcock district?
Customarily, when Tamok went there, that was in Tramcock district, meetings could not be held in Kiribong. Everyone had to go to Tramcock before Tamok came. Letters were sent to all the districts, and since I was there as a host, I had to welcome everyone and to feed them. So we had to prepare food, rice, to welcome people who came from Kiribong and other places. If the meeting lasted for only a day, we had to house them for a day. If it lasted a week, we had to house them for a week.
And before I move on to another subject, was there a Sector 13 office in Tramcock? And if so, where was that office?
The Sector 13 office was in Tramcock district, and after the war I built a second one in the north. That was a more convenient location. They did not take the office, but they used it for work. They came to work there. Tamok also went to work there. They didn't work there permanently. They would go there for a month or two and work in that office, only to give us instructions. And after that, the sector chief would then hand down to the lower levels, officials at the lower levels, what Tamok had told them. That is all. I can't say any more than what I have said.
I want to ask you about one other incident or meeting relating to Tamok that you discussed in your interviews. This was in interview E3 4626 at Khmer 00373-471, English 00380-138, French 00426-209. And here you were testifying about another discussion that you heard between Secretary Saum and Zone Secretary Tamok. I quote, "After the sector assembly ended, I heard Saum and Tamok discuss another problem, which involved a group of 60 people who were living in Chiang Tong and Kabal O villages in Tramcock district. These 60 persons were implicated by others. Saum asked Tamok how to resolve this problem." End of quote. My first follow-up question, do you remember, Mr. Witness, this group of 60 people who had been implicated? Had they been implicated in confessions from Krang Tachan, or had they been implicated by in confessions that came from a different security office that had been communicated to you?
regarding those 60 people. In fact, the arrest followed confessions from the West Zone. At the time, Byrne was also present. He was aware of everything. He knew everything. He knew many things that happened. Tamok asked him how the problem was going to be resolved, and he answered by saying that they should ask Chim to solve that problem, because those 60 people were people who had been involved in this secret struggle. So Byrne people, those 60 people who had been involved in this secret struggle, asked why they had been arrested. He said that they had been implicated, and it was after those 60 people were arrested that they were implicated. So after an investigation, those 60 persons were rehabilitated, and they are still alive today. Let me seize the opportunity to say that at the United Nations, and as far as humanity in its entirety is concerned, the members of Democratic Cambodia were not only fighting with one another, they did more than fight with one another, because we have the case of these 60 persons who were engaged in this struggle. I do not know exactly the nature of the problem they had with Tamok. So there were lots of conflicts between people during that period. Tamok was more skilled in military matters and in politics. He established a school in Pailin. So during the colonial period, he had gone to Vietnam, and he subsequently returned to Cambodia. Apparently, there was a struggle between two veterans who were fighting with one another for influence. It was a power struggle between them. So he went to the West Zone, and then one of the persons disappeared, and what was left, the only person left was Tamok. Someone in Takom also left because they couldn't tolerate one another. Since there were internal conflicts. In fact, it is rather that those internal problems are at the root of the current trial which is unfolding. President, thank you, Mr. Big Chim. It is time for us to take a break now. Judge Fens, do you have any questions to put to the prosecutor?
2 questions to the prosecutor in relation to the request for additional time and Counsel Koppe's objection when it comes to the part of the argument that dealt with the scope. Just to clarify, does the prosecution wish to ask questions that are outside the scope of case 022 as defined by the decision on severance?
Not at all, Your Honor. These are questions within the scope of case 002/02.
Thank you. Then the second question doesn't need to be asked.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like the chamber to be properly informed so that it may take its decision during the break. We intend to use an hour 20 minutes to put questions, 20 minutes regarding forced marriages, and I'll also need time. So we will request additional time independently of whether or not you would authorize questions regarding the central zone. I don't know whether what I'm saying is clear enough. It had been envisaged that would have 1 hour 20 minutes, 20 minutes for my colleague for forced marriages and 1 hour for myself, which means that if we start today, we would not be able to conclude by the end of the day. So we want to be able to continue tomorrow morning in order to complete the questions we have for this witness. I would therefore request the chamber to take into account this application independently of the prosecution motion and the objection of my learned friend regarding questions regarding the central zone. I hope it is clear to the chamber and to the bench. The bench appears to be somewhat perplexed, and the parties as well also look perplexed. We had envisaged that we'd need 2.5 days for this witness, and it was envisaged that would conclude on Friday by midday. So if you grant our wish, we would also request that you give additional time to the defense so that there should be equality of arms between the prosecution, the civil parties, and the defense. That is the application I would like to make before this chamber.
Overheard it, but what is now the combined request? How much time do prosecution and co-lead lawyers, how much more time do prosecution and co-lead lawyers ask for combined?
My friend can correct me if I misunderstand, but if they have the morning session, the first morning session tomorrow, that is about an hour and 15 minutes, so I think they would finish on that. What she's saying is that if they start at 3 o'clock, they need an hour and 15 or an hour and 20. So the last session this afternoon is shorter than the first morning session. I think that's so.
Could you answer the question? How much extension is requested?
The exact same thing we asked for before, which is just the first session tomorrow morning. Yeah.
Thank you.
Judge Laveng, please proceed. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Lysa, prosecutor, this question is for you. I understand is that you don't want to go beyond the scope of case 002/02. The questions you want to ask have to do with the central zone and sometimes the north zone. Now, it appears that in the severance decision, in the annex to that decision, we had only envisaged to deal with policies regarding purges in a general manner, and we even have a footnote number 9, in which we had indicated that we could eventually extend the examination of witnesses on factual matters regarding the north and east zones, but that would require an application for an extension of the scope. I don't know what is your position regarding these matters that have to do with the Central Zone.
Let me be clear. The people who are the victims of this purge in the Central, which is the Old North Zone, so it's part, there are two zones that are part of that internal purge. The Central Zone is the Old North Zone, so it's part of that. But the victims of this purge that are the subject of this questioning were people who went to S21. So the testimony on this subject relates to S21 and the issue of purges of cadres, which of course are connected. So I hope that, and I think it'll be very clear from the witnesses' interview as well, and from the questions I will ask, which part of the case they relate to.
S21, I understand. So the questions will be relating to S21, or that is the crime site that we're dealing with, and in effect.
Yes, there's also a segment of this trial called internal purges, so it's relevant to both of those. There's obviously a significant overlap connection between that. In answer to your other question, Judge Laverne, I know you're referring to a footnote, I believe, that was in the severance decision. I would need to consult with the office to know whether we would have any intention to do that, but not at this time. My present request has nothing to do with expanding the scope of the trial.
បាទអរគុណណាស់ហើយបញ្ជាក់រឿងមួយដែលសហប្រញ្ញារងអន្តរជាតិទៅនៅ
President, it's possible that the prosecution is wrong, because it would mean that this morning's hearings are longer than those of the afternoon. It's possible that tomorrow morning it will be shorter, and the chamber will have to rule accordingly. It is time for us to take our break. We shall resume before 3:10. Court officer, attend to the witness and bring him back to the courtroom.